Let's start
Thanks for
by
having me.
talking about the Kremlin's demand that, quote, unfriendly countries pay for Russian gas and oil in rubles. Now, it was a non-starter last several weeks, but now the EU is holding these emergency talks on Russian gas. What do you glean from this?
Right. So this is an issue that the EU is obviously contending with, but the various member states are dealing with it in different ways. So we've seen Russia now cut off gas to Poland and Bulgaria because of their refusal to pay in rubles, whereas we've seen countries like Hungary, which are more friendly towards Russia, agree to it. And then some countries in the middle, such as Germany and Austria, trying to find loopholes in order to pay for Russian gas with euros and then convert it into rubles in order to avoid sanctions. So basically, while the Europeans are all trying to diversify away from Russian energy, they know that they can't do that immediately, and they have different strategies essentially in order to deal with the interim.
Let's talk about this diversification and the real concern it's going to cause to the economies moving forward. Now, as you mentioned, they have halted the sales of oil and gas to Poland and Bulgaria. Now, those two nations are going to be affected differently. Warmer months are coming. Poland says it's well supplied. What about Bulgaria? And is there a way we can kind of crystallize this and see what kind of severe economic harm it could do?
Right. So as you mentioned, Poland is pretty well prepared for it. Bulgaria is also to a certain extent. With the summer months coming, there is some alternatives that Bulgaria has had, as you mentioned in the previous segment, with countries like Greece via interconnectors. I think the key issue at this point is not having the gas supplies, but rather having to pay higher prices because Russian gas via pipeline is traditionally cheaper. And while Poland does have options in Bulgaria as well from alternative sources, including LNG supplies or those interconnectors, they're going to be typically higher. And with these countries already dealing with inflation, this is going to put economic pressure for sure on the European bloc.
And I think that those are great points. And let's look at what we've learned already. So this has actually divided the EU to a degree, forcing them to diversify, and secondly, forcing some countries to pay higher prices. So the way this is playing out, is this a win for Putin at this point, or at least a chance for him to say it is?
I wouldn't call it so much a win. And these countries already had, even prior to the Ukrainian conflict recently, they had various positions and they weren't in complete solidarity on this issue when it comes to energy, just based off of their positioning and how dependent they were on Russia. So certainly Russia is trying to flex its muscles a little bit and trying to weaken EU solidarity. I think it's worth noting that sanctions have been voted unanimously from the EU, so it hasn't weakened the EU on the major issues. But this is Russia is basically seeking out areas of weakness that they could try to exploit moving forward.
Again, I want to talk about the situation in Mariupol because I think you made some really good points saying that the EU has really been unified, as is really so much of the world, as the nations as well as private countries. And by all accounts, a horrific tragedy is brewing in Mariupol. Let's examine this from a few angles. First, the sanctions by many nations and companies against Russia. They are standing firm. If Russia takes Mariupol, it will have its land bridge, but at what cost? Could a tragedy really, it's hard to imagine it getting worse, but further inflame this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to point out Russia is already in control of much of Mariupol. It's just that kind of those lone areas around that Azovstal steel plant which are holding out. But for all intents and purposes, Russia does have that land bridge. It's basically just trying to solidify that. But as you mentioned, it's come at tremendous economic cost. In terms of the sanctions, those are going to be a little bit weaker on the energy front because of the dependencies that we talked about earlier from the European countries, but financial sanctions, export controls on technology. These are things that are going to hit Russia increasingly hard as the months go, and especially as the conflict drags out. So it will probably get that land bridge, but it will come at a severe economic cost for Russia.
But if there are nations sort of trying to straddle the fence at this point, and there's a horrible human suffering catastrophe, what will that do to the worldwide opinion on what's going on there?
Well, this is an issue that I think is, in terms of world opinion, largely against Russia, at least from the West, as the West is concerned. But Russia has, shown that it's willing to move forward with its objectives at all costs. Now, as I mentioned before, it will depend on how long Russia can really hold on to these areas, because even with these attacks on near Odessa and near Kharkiv, Russia is really trying to focus on solidifying its position in the east. If it can do that, then I think Russia will try to hold on. But the more it struggles and the more that conflict drags out, not only public opinion, but the economy and public opinion within Russia itself could be a problem for the Kremlin.
Real quickly, one thing Putin wanted, he stressed he was concerned about a growing NATO in that area. What do you think about the fact that this could lead to a more unified, stronger NATO moving forward?
I think that has been the result of the conflict. We're seeing, NATO countries that are current members in solidarity, the potential expansion this summer into Sweden and Finland. So in that sense, it could be seen as a strategic reversal for Russia, even as it tries to hold on to and expand territory in Ukraine.
Okay, thanks. Eugene Chausovsky, geopolitical analyst. We appreciate it, as always. Thank you.